Now we're seeing a couple really interesting things happen in the crypto market right now as we start to see things flip a little bit back into the more bullish side. However, I do still have some concerns that the worst of it may not be over yet, so I did want to talk to you a little bit about what we could be seeing coming on the horizon and how that could impact the crypto space. So let's go on ahead, we'll dive right on in to check everything out. Here we can see, starting out on the crypto bubbles, as mentioned, it has been a pretty green day so far. We are seeing a lot of familiar names do relatively well here, and it has been a pretty nice day. We can see anything probably, I would say, about maybe like a 6-ish% average here, but it is a bit varied. We can see things as high as 10 to even up to 20% here, and then lows around kind of 1 to 2%. So there is a bit more of a variation than what we have seen in the past, but a lot of things we do talk about on the channel doing quite well here. We could see things like Solana, ICP, AERO, I'm sure there's other things like Kaspa. Yeah, here's Kaspa as well. We can also see things like XRP doing quite well, Pumped Up Fun, IP has been one that's been wildly volatile. This is one that's seen massive ups, massive downs, and everything in between. But you can see overall that the market is looking pretty decent in terms of kind of what we've seen, relative to what we've seen in the past. But we can see even on the week we are still quite negative. Much of the discussion, I guess we could say, has been around Aster. Aster has done some pretty wild things over the past couple of weeks, so it will be interesting to see kind of how this holds up relative to everything else over the next several weeks. But at least for right now, there are a couple of things, as I mentioned, that I do think are potentially a little bit worrying in terms of at least short-term moves to the downside. Now, if we look here, we could see that there is a Bitcoin CME gap at 109,950. Again, CME gaps don't always close, but oftentimes they usually do. So it is very important to take note that we could see another visit back down into that 109,000 range before we do see a sustained move to the upside. Now, this is not a guarantee, but there is that possibility that we do see something like that. This is kind of, I would say, partially backed by what we're seeing out of the Bitcoin liquidation map. If we go ahead and take a look there, we can see a couple of different things on the 1 day actually indicating that we see a move to the downside to liquidate longs. Again, seeing moves is down as low as 110,500 would liquidate almost $1 billion, and then getting down into that $109,000, we're getting over $1 billion. So there is very much a strong possibility that we do see that type of move coming in. We also can see on the 7-day there is a similar type of chart showing up. It's a little bit more even, but we can see again also a lot in this kind of even $108,000, $107,000 range, in which we'd be seeing about $4 billion, even $4.5 billion get liquidated here. Now, we don't have total confluence because on the 30-day it does indicate that we do liquidate shorts. There are more shorts to be liquidated to the upside than there are longs to be liquidated to the downside. However, as you can see, there's a massive wall of shorts coming in around the 108,000 range, which would get us close to about $6 billion in shorts to be liquidated. So again, there is still a lot of liquidity to that downside here for a potential move on this CME gap. So again, while this is not ever a guarantee, it is something that we should at least be considerate of. And while we're looking at kind of how this or how Bitcoin affects potentially some recent or some future moves in the market, I did want to take a look at the total 2 and total 3 market caps, because those are basically everything outside of Bitcoin, right? So we'll start here at total 2, where we can see we had such a close run here to hitting some all-time high. Well, I mean, we technically did hit all-time highs, but they were obviously kind of a double rejection here on the Weex. We could see the 13th of September and the 18th of September being the 2 days that kind of got and broke above this kind of key $1.7 trillion mark, but quickly rejected both times. And you can see now we have seen a bit of a larger retrace, getting close to this kind of $1.47 trillion range and bouncing. We are getting, at least in the immediate moment, we are seeing a little bit of a rejection. There is that possibility we come all the way back down to that $1.7 trillion mark, particularly if we do see that Bitcoin CME gap get closed, which is exactly why I wanted to take a look at both the total 2 as well as the total 3 to see what some of the implications could be if we were to see a momentary move to the downside. And we are starting to see a decent level of support get put up at this $1.47 trillion mark. which does mean that we are seeing some strengths out of altcoins, and we could see this support hold. Even if we did see a little bit of a momentary dump out of Bitcoin, it does seem that we could potentially continue to hold this level of support here. If we look at total 3, it's looking slightly different. We're actually starting to see we had dumped below this level of resistance, or I guess this level of support at this point at the 1.09 trillion. We started to rally to come back up above it, but we are actually getting rejected by it right now on this kind of $1.09 trillion mark. So that does mean we may need to spend a little bit more time kind of bouncing between 1.09 trillion and then even at like the $1 trillion range would be that next level. And then the next other major level is going to be about the $958 billion range. So we do have some space to play here if we cannot get above these. You can see here there's actually like 3 levels of resistance in relatively quick succession here between 1.09, 1.13, and 1.16 trillion. So depending on kind of what happens next here, that of course could indicate or dictate some of the next moves that we do see. So what I am looking for, particularly as it relates to altcoins, because this again is primarily an altcoins channel and this video or this market update specifically does relate to altcoins, I want to discuss about what specifically this could mean. And so what we are seeing right now is Bitcoin doing all right, it's holding relatively well. Ethereum doing all right, holding relatively well. And then if we add in, I guess we should say Ethereum plus altcoins, holding relatively well. Altcoins minus Ethereum not holding as well as Ethereum. So that does mean Ethereum is kind of buoying a lot of what we're seeing out of the altcoins. But altcoins still are doing quite well. We're very, very close to all-time highs. Once we do have the momentum to kind of break through these levels of resistance, I do think we will see a pretty massive move to the upside. Now, of course, anything can happen and we'll have to see, but we can see, it's been a really nice and consistent move to the upside here. Even if we were to take some trend lines, I wonder if we could even get, we're pretty close to having this pretty consistent trend line that we've been following for the past 6 months at this point. It's really been a pretty consistent line. And then we also can see from the down or on the bottom end of this trend line, probably something fairly similar as well. Not as clean of a trend line for sure, but if we go into the shorter range or even into like this, it's a little bit cleaner. Again, not anything super exact though. So, but we are seeing, the overall kind of designs of this ascending channel with higher highs and higher lows consistently coming in over the past 6 months or so. So I do think that this is, of course, a really good thing. And you can see we're getting very, very close to, technically breaking new all-time highs, but not really being able to hold them. So we'll have to see exactly what happens here. I think things are looking really nice for the altcoin market. We just have to be patient and see kind of what happens over the coming weeks and months and so on. I did also want to call out Kaspa specifically because earlier today they did complete a test in which they were trying to essentially see how much volume and how much throughput they could put onto the Kaspa chain. And we could see Kaspa hit a record 61 million transactions within a single day here. This is massive. I think this is the most that any proof of work chain has ever done before, which is pretty impressive. So that is, of course, very, very good news and great to hear and great to see from the Kaspa ecosystem. Now, of course, that does just mean that it's capable of handling that. That doesn't mean that there's actually that many transactions needed on a particular basis. This was meant more as like for a test. So again, that's not to pour cold water on this and say that it's not anything impressive. It is, of course, very impressive. We just have to kind of understand kind of through the lens of which this was being done, which is mainly for a test. We don't necessarily have that level of organic traffic quite yet. This was just to prove that it could handle that level of organic traffic, which is, of course, an achievement all in its own. So lots of different things going on here today. I am very interested to hear what you all think as far as, what are your thoughts with, the overall altcoin market? What are your thoughts as it relates to what Bitcoin will do next? Also, if you are interested, I've realized I haven't actually been showing too many of my trades lately. That's because a lot of them are just kind of not really doing much, not really doing too much. We saw them move up a little bit, and then, for example, like my XRP trade. It did come down a little bit. It's just kind of sitting. I think it's up about 5% right now. So again, nothing really too crazy. A lot of the trades that I did have open, we did hit because they were running in profit. We had them hit those stop losses as the market started to come back down. And right now we're just waiting for another entry. So things getting a little bit boring. I did open a 5x long or actually I believe it was a 3x long Bitcoin trade. That one's up a couple of percent, nothing too crazy as well. But again, a lot of the things here happening in the market, not too fancy, not too exciting. So we are just kind of waiting for kind of those next setups and those next plays to be made. Things do look good. We are kind of doing a little bit of that consolidation. We're coming down a little bit to some of these key levels of supports after seeing, frankly, several months of really, really strong price action. And so having a little bit of some pullback, having a little bit of a reset in the market, I personally do not feel is a bad thing. And I don't think it's going to be something that really lives too long, right? I do think over time we will have plenty of time to see further moves to the upside. I'm still very bullish on the end of 2025 and the beginning of 2026 as far as we're concerned for altcoins and kind of the movement of them and a lot of that type of stuff. So I'd overall be very interested to hear what you think about the altcoin market, about the crypto market. Do you think we've topped? Do you think we've only just begun? I'm hearing a lot of different kind of mixes between various people, whether it's they're certain that the market's topped, they're certain that crypto's a scam, they're certain that all this type of stuff is happening, and then I've heard others that think we're kind of on the other side of that and we still have multiple 100x's to go. And I would say I'm probably somewhere in the middle there. I do think that we are in a pretty strong time to be in crypto. However, it's probably not the maximum point of opportunity. That, of course, would have been when we were looking at a $14,000-$15,000 Bitcoin a couple years back, right after FTX. So, of course, things still looking really, really good, though. I think as far as altcoins are concerned, this might actually be, one of the better times to be looking into altcoins. But again, altcoins are much, much higher risk. So you do have to understand that if you get into altcoins, there is that extra layer of risk there. Now, again, as I mentioned, I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have relating to any of these, is particularly with some of the Kaspa news. I'd be interested, any of my Kaspa watchers or Kaspa fans, what are your thoughts on the news from Kaspa? I think it's really, really good news, but not necessarily anything game-changing inherently. But I would love to know if you agree or disagree with that. Now, overall, if you did find the information in this video useful, of course, you guys know what to do. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.